and welcome to the WBC FasterTogether LinkedIn Live series of the Women Business Collaborative. The WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 65 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders building a movement to create equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. This is relevant as this month is Women's History Month. It's through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability that we are mobilizing thousands of diverse professional men and women, business organizations, public and private companies, and communities to accelerate change. Check the chat for our 9 action initiatives that drive change. And our goals are to increase women in the C-suite and the boardroom, to address the underrepresentation of women in access to capital in certain industries, and to advance a pipeline of women leaders to bring gender and pay parity and diversity, equity, inclusion to the business landscape. In all of our work, we are committed to diversity, and the WBC councils and board of directors include more than 34% people of color. And the power of collaboration is already creating momentum and accelerating the pace of change for businesswomen. In fact, we are ringing the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow, March 4th, in order to celebrate the commitment to equal position, pay, and power. But through this series, we want to show you our work, and we want you to see the key ways that we advocate for change by presenting the data, research, and best practices, by lifting up women's voices for change, and by showing the importance of cross-generational collaboration and the allyship, especially that of men in their movement. So today we're here to talk about how women rise to the C-suite and the pipeline. And we're here to talk about what are the pathways, what are the tools, what's the reality in 2022. And another thing we really want to talk about that Rosina and I were talking about before we get on was, the shape of the workforce and company culture. So we have with us today, Rosina Racciopi, the president and CEO of Women Unlimited and the co-chair of our Women in the Pipeline Action Initiative. And Rosina and our other key WBC stakeholders have interviewed 20 women about their rise to the C-suite and how they rose, what they did, and about their experiences. Rosina, welcome. I'm thrilled to speak with you today.
Oh, I'm so enjoying our conversation and looking forward to this conversation, Gwen.
Well, yeah, let's continue. We were just talking let's set the stage about sort of the state of women in the C-suite. What is this looking like right now in light of, post or living with COVID, the great resignation? What does it look like today?
Well, the good news is that there are more women in the CEO suite in managing director roles than ever before, right? In 2019, it was 19%, or 15%. It's 23%. That's a big growth of women, and a significant portion of them are women of color. So that is progress, absolutely progress. When we look at the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 23, the most ever. So I'll turn it the other way, and yet there's only 23, right? Women are over half the workforce. Why is there only 23, right? In the lower ranks, in the earlier careers, the women are half. And then it starts diminishing the more senior you go, the further along the talent pipeline you become. It's one of the reasons we're so passionate about looking at that talent pipeline at the WBC.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about that, because we're also measuring women in the boardroom. So it's interesting to sort of think from sort of the board to the CEO to C-suite and on down. Tell us about these interviews. Tell us, what are you finding in interviewing these women?
We set out initially to explore, to move past what we've heard traditionally around the pathways to the C-suite. We've all heard that the way to get to the C-suite is you need to own a P&L. You need to maybe work internationally. So there's certain narrow accepted experiences that an individual needs to have in order to get there. And we thought, well, we know a lot of women that are in the C-suite. What other things have they been doing? What other strategies did they employ that help them achieve their success at getting to the C-suite? So I think initially what we heard is there's themes across all of these interviews. These women certainly, like many of their colleagues, very talented. And they were very focused, right? They were very focused, not necessarily on having that ideal goal, but they were always looking at what was ahead of them, how they can contribute. a big theme across all the interviews are, I'm going to bucket it into relationships, right? You know, who are those individuals in my network that keep me informed around the business and opportunities, right? But also provide me with the feedback that I need to hear at pivotal times in my career. We know that one of the reasons women get stuck in the pipeline, at least in the work that I do, is they continue to feel that what I would have has gotten me to this point should allow me to continue to rise. And we know there's always this recalibration of our skill sets along the way. But without guidance, our feedback, we're operating in a vacuum. And then there's, having allyships. Most of the women that I interviewed talked about having a critical relationship with a manager, a senior leader who saw something in them and gave them opportunities, even when they thought, I can't do this role. Why would I run a sales function? I'm an engineer. But they had an ally who was saying, you need to round out your business experience and exposure to set you up for these other opportunities down the road.
And I'd love to hear a little bit too about kind of young women come to me a lot and say, I've got my job and now I'm going to go join the women's leadership group, or I'm going to go and join that group, or I'm waiting for someone to come to me. I want to hear a little bit in those themes, that conversation of going and finding those moments and opportunities and going to find those allies, mentors, or sponsors, right? And being open to who are you looking for? What are they looking for?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think we talk to a lot with women, especially the women that are in our programs, around the importance of creating relationships within your network and mentoring. But it's not that you should create relationships broadly with whomever, right? But really thinking about who are the individuals that offer diverse perspective and understanding of the business that will complement what you know, right? So great, you're bringing a body of knowledge and expertise to your organization, but you only know, you're limited, right, in what you know and what you can do. You can enhance your power and your impact if you connect with people who see the world differently than you, challenge your thinking, and allow you to get pushed a little bit more to contribute more and play a bigger role. But if you just connect, what we see a lot of people doing, and women in particular, we go to people that affirm us, that make us feel good. And I understand that in organizations that can be tough, but it's also dangerous. If I'm just with this limited group of people, I'm missing a whole host of information that is critical for my success as a businesswoman.
So in addition to sort of the network and the allyship at the workplace, what are some of the other resources, right? I know there's Women Unlimited, we've got 65 organizations. I want to kind of dive into a little bit of how we can build that pipeline, because there's the kind of employee, there's the employer, and then there's kind of this universe of groups and people that can help you, as you said, find your power. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of your perspective on how we can help build that pipeline, all the different pieces of that.
Well, I think it starts with organizations really taking a step back and looking holistically at their systems and practices. And I'm not talking about the things that are written on paper. I'm talking about the culture, the way we interact with one another, the way that we create solutions for our customers, the way that we arrive at a decision. How does that allow different voices to be heard? How does that allow different people to have a seat at the table? Because we know that, in essence, is what the power of diversity is, right? It's not just having a diverse amount of employees, but it's also activating their capabilities to contribute, right? And I think that companies can be well-intended, but may have practices that they have had in place for years, and they're not visible to them, but it's creating a barrier for people to contribute. I think COVID kind of busted them all apart, right? Mm-hmm. We now had to work differently. We now had to create differently. So it's helped us uncover some. Let us not be lazy. Let's continue to be curious about what are other ways that we can work differently and contribute more, create more done, more for our customers and more for our organization. And then I think for women, we need to think about the opportunity that this all provides us. You know, one of the things that we saw when COVID hit, this sense of ambiguity, thinking, I mean, if you remember, Gwen, we thought this would be over in a couple of months. We thought we'd be back in the office, life will go back as usual. And here we are 2.5 years later, still wondering, right? What I've seen many women do in this period of seismic change is kind of wait until, you know, the dust settles so they can figure out where they can contribute. And some of it is rightly so. A lot of their world just got blown up and they needed to manage a lot of things. But I think this also creates an opportunity for us as women leaders to showcase how we can navigate a very uncertain time and direct the sales of our team, of our organization, to show our leadership capabilities and how we can contribute in ways that maybe people would not have noticed. So, you know, in some ways, take advantage of the opportunity.
Like you said, the pathways were sort of changing before, and COVID's given this kind of different spin on the pathways. I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of, you know, the experience of the women of color and how we're working on that, because that fits into allyship, right? And I know that you were deliberate in the interviews too to make sure that we got, you know, perspectives. What are you, same trends, I'm assuming, what, you know, what are you seeing? What are women of color saying too in this sort of pathway and building the pipeline piece of the discussion?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because we know that when we talk about diversity and women, it seems like we're talking about all women as one unified group. And women of color have a very different experience. They're more marginalized, less opportunities, more visible, which creates, it's a double-edged sword, right? But the women that have participated in our research, again, formed relationships with key business leaders who help them understand how to navigate the organization early in their career. So this isn't something that you wake up and do in the middle of your career and say, gee, I may want to go into a more senior role. Maybe now I should start building relationships. It's really something that we need to learn from our male colleagues. We need to build those relationships from the beginning. It is not just about, oh, my work will get noticed and it'll help me advance. Everybody does good work that's advancing. We also need these relationships. And so I think building those key relationships that gave them the opportunity, and more importantly, helps guide them in thinking about which opportunity would set the stage best for them.
And sort of in the last part, you know, we always like to kind of end these with like, what can the company do? What can the organization do? Like, what are some of the best practices that you're seeing? And it's interesting because we've talked a lot about kind of what the woman can do and what the employee can do, and still want to kind of come to a couple other calls to action, if you will, there. But love to hear about how, if I'm a company and I want to create that space or help build those networks or make sure that those opportunities are open, what are you seeing, and what are you seeing happening, I guess, in trends?
I'm going to frame this a little differently. Before COVID, what I noticed is that there were a lot of well-intended leaders who wanted to create a stronger pipeline of women and women of color advancing, and were frustrated by the lack of momentum, right? I keep thinking about the work that we do. Companies spend an inordinate amount of time and money on these development, DE&I initiatives, and yet they're getting minimal results. And I don't know of any other business strategy that would be continued to be fostered with not getting a strong result, right? We've both been in business a long time. What I see as a critical linchpin in really unlocking the potential is helping leaders and middle managers, and I'm going to point out more male managers, understand the nuances, the subtleties of a woman's experience in an organization, of a woman of color's experience in the organization. Because you can read about it, but you don't understand it. So you can have empathy for it. We don't really need empathy. We need people who take action, right? One of the things we saw as a result of the pandemic is the managers that were sponsoring women in our program had a bird's eye view into what these women's lives were like and their roles. And they were more focused on providing the guidance, the coaching for them. And I think it's because, after the dust settled in the first couple of months, they became very aware of the kind of support these women needed and the fact they wanted to keep them active in the organization. So they were more open to those opportunities, those different types of arrangements that would allow them to have an integrated life and be able to contribute productively to the organization.
No, and I think it's interesting because I think everyone's kind of rethinking, as I hear companies too, talking about how are we bringing people back? What type of experience we're creating? How are we building that team, virtual? Because some women have started their careers never being in the office.
Right.
Right.
It's
And
crazy. I know a lot of women, my daughter in particular, she's in a hybrid role, and it will be that way. She was hired into that. And I think while that's an advantage, because it allows you to live the life the way that you want to, you also need to be mindful of how are the ways in which you can connect with the people that are influential, the people that will create those opportunities for you. Just because you're remote, that's great on one sense. Don't be, I'm going to use the word lazy, in thinking, well, I don't have to do anything else, because you can easily be forgotten. So how do you contribute? How do you build relationships with people that are influencers and decision makers in your organization?
Absolutely. And I think that's going to be we've got a couple people within the WBC that have been talking about that, not just how do you project yourself, how do you get to know your team members, but how do you get the influencers? How do you build your career if you're in that hybrid and everyone isn't?
Yeah.
So we're looking for this research to be coming out in April. Is that right, Rosina?
We are. We're working hard on synthesizing. We have a great team that has been interviewing all these wonderful women who are so generous in giving us their time and their stories. And they're so inspiring for us as we were going through this project. We cannot wait to share it with all of you, but we're hoping in April that we'll be able to share it with everybody.
Oh, that's going to be fantastic. We look forward to it. Rosina, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and look forward to that research coming out in April and more discussions on it. Actually, this month, we'll be talking with some of the people who've been interviewed, more specifically on some of the themes. But this is all we have time for today. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Our next show will be next week, Thursday, March 10th at 12 p.m. Linda Peakshack will talk with Susan Page, DC Bureau Chief of USA Today. But join us weekly and to keep up to date on our progress, the movement for gender parity in business, and the latest issues. Follow us on social media at WBC Collaborative on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. where we ring the bell for equal position, pay, and power. Thank you, everybody.